Think of the family you grew up in. Think of the other children who shared that household. Siblings older than you, younger than you, or perhaps the particular aloneness of being the only one. Now ask yourself this: were you all raised the same way? The answer, if you are honest, is no. You were raised in the same house, by the same parents, with the same furniture and the same dinner table. Asterisk. But you were not raised in the same family. Asterisk. Because the family each child is born into is determined not only by the parents, but by the position the child occupies among the others. Alfred Adler was the first psychologist in history to make this observation with the precision of a scientist and the compassion of someone who had lived it from the inside. He was the second of 6 children. He watched his older brother with the particular intensity that only a second-born can understand. The burning awareness of someone who has arrived to find the best seat already taken. What he discovered through decades of clinical work reshaped everything we thought we understood about where personality comes from. Your birth order, Adler argued, is not a trivial biographical detail. Asterisk, it is one of the most powerful invisible forces shaping who you became. Not because of genetics. Not because of some predetermined fate. Asterisk. But because of the psychological situation you found yourself in as a small child, trying to find your place in the first social world you ever knew. Your family. The firstborn child faces a world that belongs entirely to them, and then loses it. The second-born arrives already in competition. The middle child exists in a permanent negotiation. Asterisk, the youngest inherits a world shaped by everyone who came before. Asterisk, and the only child faces the peculiar challenge of a world with no rivals and no peers simultaneously. Each of these positions produces a distinct psychological orientation. Asterisk, a characteristic way of reading the world, of understanding power and belonging, of anticipating what must be done to secure a place of value. None of them are destiny. Asterisk, Adler was clear about this. Asterisk, but all of them are influence, the kind of invisible, structural influence that operates beneath conscious awareness and shapes choices that feel entirely free. Today, I want to take you through each of these positions in the depth and detail Adler himself brought to them. Not as a parlor game of self-categorization, but as a genuine act of self-understanding. Asterisk, because the moment you see the logic of your own psychological formation, the moment you can trace the line between the child you were and the patterns you still carry, something shifts. The unconscious stops being fate. Asterisk. It becomes material to work with. And that, as Adler understood better than almost anyone, is when real change becomes possible. Asterisk. Before we enter each position, I want to establish the framework Adler used to understand them. Because without it, birth order becomes astrology, a set of flattering or unflattering labels with no explanatory mechanism behind them. Adler's framework rested on 3 foundations. The first was what he called the striving for significance. Every human being, from the earliest age, is engaged in an active search for a place of value within their social world. Asterisk. This is not vanity. It is a fundamental psychological necessity, as basic as the need for food and warmth. The child who does not find a sense of significance within their family will find one outside it, or will organize their entire psychological life around compensating for its absence. The second foundation was the concept of the perceived situation. What matters, in Adler's framework, is not the objective facts of a child's position, but how that child perceives and interprets those facts. Two firstborn children, indifferent. Families may have entirely different psychological responses to their shared position, because the meaning they constructed from it differs. Adler was always studying the private logic of the individual, not the statistical average. The third and most important foundation was what Adler called the lifestyle, the largely unconscious set of conclusions a child draws about themselves, about other people, and about what must be done to belong and to matter. This lifestyle is formed very early, by 5 or 6 years old. Adler believed its basic outlines are already set, and it persists, quietly governing choices and interpretations long into adult life. Birth order, in this framework, is not a cause of personality. It is a situation that consistently tends to produce certain lifestyle conclusions, because children in similar positions face similar psychological challenges and tend to find similar solutions. The firstborn who loses their throne tends to conclude, I must maintain my position through achievement and responsibility. The secondborn, who is always chasing, tends to conclude, I must find a different way to win. The middle child who feels squeezed tends to conclude, I must negotiate. I must find my unique niche. The youngest, who is always cared for, tends to conclude, I am lovable, but perhaps not capable. The only child who has no rivals tends to conclude, I am the center, and the world should continue to operate accordingly. These are not rigid laws. They are tendencies, observable patterns in the clinical data of hundreds of thousands of lives. And they are, as Adler always insisted, starting points for understanding rather than endpoints for judgment. The firstborn child enters a world of extraordinary privilege. For a period of time, months or years, depending on the family, they have the complete and undivided attention of two adults who have never been parents before, and who bring to this child all of their hopes, anxieties, and inexhaustible energy. The firstborn is an experiment conducted with maximum investment, and then the second child arrives, and everything changes. Adler described this moment as the dethronement. It is perhaps the most psychologically significant event in the firstborn's life, not because of what is lost materially, but because of what must be concluded psychologically. The world that was organized entirely around this child suddenly reorganizes itself around another dot. The center of gravity shifts, and the firstborn must find a new way to matter. The most common response, Adler observed, is a turn toward competence, responsibility, and the maintenance of order. The firstborn learns, often without being taught, that they can reclaim significance by becoming the one who is trusted, the helper, the achiever, the one who demonstrates that they have earned their place through capability rather than simply occupying it by right. This is why firstborns are statistically overrepresented among world leaders, chief executives, and eldest siblings who become the family's designated responsible adult. The psychological training began in childhood and never fully stopped. But the firstborn psychology carries costs that are less often examined. The turn toward responsibility and achievement can become a compulsion. The firstborn, who learned that their place was secure only when they were performing at the highest level, may find in adult life that they cannot stop performing. That rest feels like danger. The delegating feels like abandonment of control. That admitting weakness or uncertainty triggers an anxiety disproportionate to the situation. Adler also noted a characteristic firstborn relationship with authority. The firstborn was, for a time, the authority in the sibling system. They tend, as a result, to be more comfortable with hierarchical structures, more likely to identify with rather than against institutional power, and sometimes more rigid in their response to challenges to established order. They are the children most likely to become the parents, the ones who internalize the rules and transmit them to the next generation. And there is a particular firstborn wound that Adler traced with careful attention. The experience of having had something and lost it. This is qualitatively different from the experience of the secondborn, who never had the throne, and therefore is not haunted by its memory. The firstborn carries a kind of nostalgia for a world that no longer exists. A faint but persistent sense that something has been taken. This can express itself as a tendency toward conservatism, a preference for things as they were over things as they might become, as a difficulty with change, as a subtle grief for what was before. If you are a firstborn, or if you recognize this psychology in someone you love, Adler would ask you to consider how much of what you call your standards is actually the firstborn's learned response to dethronement. How much of your relationship with control is the child's solution to the terror of losing a world that once belonged entirely to them. These are not accusations. They are invitations to see what was always there. The small child who worked so hard to keep their place, and who is still, in certain moments, working just as hard. The second-born child never knows a world without competition. From the first moment of consciousness, there is already someone ahead, older, larger, more capable, more established in the family's affections. The firstborn had to learn competition. The secondborn is born into it. Adler considered the second-born position one of the most psychologically interesting of all. Because the child who is born already behind, and who has the constant lived experience of watching someone older and apparently more capable, faces a choice that will shape their entire character. Give up, or find another way to win. Almost universally, Adler observed, the secondborn chooses the latter. And the strategy they develop is elegant in its logic. They do not try to beat the firstborn at the firstborn's own game. They identify a different game, and they become exceptional at it. The firstborn is responsible and rule-following. The secondborn becomes the creative rebel. The firstborn excels academically. The secondborn becomes the athlete or the artist. The firstborn is the serious one. The secondborn becomes the funny one, the one who has discovered that humor is a territory the older sibling has not claimed. This is what Adler called the race with the pacesetter. The secondborn's development is always in relationship to defined in contrast to the person ahead of them. Their identity is, in a profound sense, reactive, built not only from within, but from alongside. This produces a psychology of remarkable energy and drive. The second-born tends to be the most competitive of all the positions, not because they are innately aggressive, but because they have been training for competition since before they could walk. The second-born also tends toward what Adler called the revolutionary orientation. Asterisk. They are the ones most likely to challenge authority, to question established order, to ask why things must be the way they are and whether they might be arranged differently. Asterisk. History's great disruptors are disproportionately second-born children. This makes psychological sense. Asterisk. The firstborn aligned with authority because they once were the authority. Asterisk. The second-born has never held the top position and has every reason to believe that the current arrangement is negotiable. But the second-born psychology carries its own characteristic wounds. The relentless orientation toward the one ahead can become exhausting. Asterisk. The second-born may never quite feel that they have arrived because the psychological habit of chasing was formed before they had any capacity to question it. Asterisk. In adult life, after the older sibling has long ceased to be a direct rival, the habit persists. There's always another pacesetter, a colleague, a competitor, a version of themselves that they haven't yet caught up to. There is also a particular second-born relationship with fairness. They entered a world that was, from their perspective, already unfair, already occupied, already arranged in someone else's favor. Asterisk. This can produce a fine-tuned sensitivity to injustice that becomes one of their greatest gifts. Asterisk. It can also produce a tendency to find inequity everywhere, to carry a low-grade grievance against the arrangement of things that has no single object. Adler would ask the second-born, how much of your drive is genuinely yours? And how much is still the child running to catch the older sibling? Not to stop the running, but to choose it. To run because you want to, rather than because the one ahead has not yet been caught. Asterisk. The middle child occupies perhaps the most psychologically complex position of all. Asterisk. They have neither the firstborn's original claim to undivided attention, nor the youngest child's perpetual indulgence. Asterisk. They exist in the space between squeezed, as Adler put it, from both directions. Above them, an older sibling who has always been more capable. Asterisk. Below them, a younger sibling who always seems to receive more care. Asterisk. The middle child's psychological project is to find a place of value in a landscape where the most obvious positions are already occupied. This produces, in Adler's observation, a particular set of social gifts that are among the most remarkable of any birth position. Asterisk. The middle child becomes, almost by necessity, an exceptional reader of social dynamics. Asterisk. They develop an early and finely calibrated sensitivity to what others are feeling, what is needed in a given moment, how to navigate competing demands without igniting conflict. They become diplomats, mediators. The ones who know how to make everyone feel heard. Middle children are consistently overrepresented among successful negotiators, therapists, diplomats, and leaders of organizations that require coalition building. Asterisk. The psychological training they received in the family, the daily practice of managing upward to the older sibling and downward to the younger one, all while securing their own place, becomes, in adult life, a genuinely rare capacity. But the middle child's gifts come with characteristic wounds. The deepest is what Adler called the feeling of having no place. The firstborn knew they were first. The youngest knows they are last. The middle child may feel that they have no definitive position at all, that they are permanently between, permanently in transit, never quite fully belonging to any defined territory. This can produce, in adult life, a restlessness, a difficulty settling, a sense that the real life, the one where they finally feel fully at home, is always slightly elsewhere. Middle children report, at higher rates than any other position, feeling invisible within their families of origin. There is also a middle-child relationship with uniqueness that Adler traced carefully, because all the most obvious identities were taken. The responsible achiever, the charming youngest. The middle child often develops an intense need to find something entirely their own. A niche, a talent, a way of being in the world that no one else in the family has claimed. This search for a unique territory can become one of the middle child's most generative qualities, the source of genuine creativity and originality. Or it can become a restless, dissatisfied quality that makes commitment difficult. Adler would ask the middle child, what would it feel like to belong to the position you already occupy? Not the one above you or below you, the one you are, already in with all its imperfection and all its particular gifts? Because the middle child's place, properly inhabited, is not the absence of a position. It is a position of extraordinary flexibility and human intelligence. One that the world consistently needs and rarely recognizes. The youngest child enters a world that has already been broken in by everyone who came before. The parents are more relaxed. The household routines are more established. The anxiety that attended the firstborn's every developmental milestone has softened into something more familiar and less intense. And there are older siblings, people who have already mastered the world the youngest is just entering, and who can serve as guides, models, and sources of assistance. The youngest child tends, as a result, to develop a particular ease with people. They have learned from the beginning that charm and likability open doors. They have been the recipient of care and attention from multiple directions simultaneously, parents and older siblings alike. They know, in a way that no other position quite knows, what it feels like to be adored. This produces, in many youngest children, a warmth and social fluency that is genuinely exceptional. They are comfortable in rooms of strangers in a way that the firstborn, with their careful authority, or the middle child, with their diplomatic wariness, often is not. Adler also noted a particular youngest child relationship with ambition that is often misunderstood. The youngest child grows up watching everyone around them do things they cannot yet do. They are, chronologically, always the least capable in the room. This can produce either a profound discouragement, a lifestyle conclusion that says I will always be smaller and therefore I will let others do it, or an enormous compensatory drive. The youngest child who chooses the second path becomes, in Adler's words, the one who overtakes everyone. The most famous example in Adler's own clinical literature was a youngest child who became so driven to surpass the older siblings, who had always been ahead, that they outperformed them in every domain they entered. History's great overachievers are, again and again, the youngest. But the youngest child's psychology carries costs that the warmth and charm can obscure. The child who was always cared for by others may develop a subtle belief that care is something that arrives from outside, rather than something they generate within themselves. In adult life, this can manifest as a difficulty with independence. A tendency to wait for circumstances to improve rather than to change them. A belief, operating beneath conscious awareness, that someone or something will eventually come and solve the problem. There is also a youngest child relationship with responsibility that Adler observed with compassion rather than judgment. Asterisk, because they were the youngest, they were rarely given serious responsibility in the family system. Decisions were made around them and for them more than by them. Asterisk, this can produce, in adult life, a genuine difficulty with the way of accountability, not from selfishness, but from simple inexperience. Adler would ask the youngest child, what would it mean to be the one who takes care? Asterisk, not the one who is cared for, but the one who generates care, who takes responsibility, who stands in the room as the person others lean toward, rather than the one who leans. Because the youngest's extraordinary warmth and social intelligence are exactly the qualities that make exceptional leadership possible. The gift was always there. Asterisk. What was missing was the permission to be the one who gives rather than the one who receives. Asterisk. The only child occupies a position that at first appears to be one of pure advantage. All the parental attention. Asterisk. No competition for resources or affection. Asterisk. No sibling to dethrone them or crowd them or claim the better. Bedroom. And yet Adler considered the only child's psychological situation one of the most complex and potentially fraught of all the positions. Asterisk. Not because of what the only child lacks in material terms, but because of what their particular social training teaches them about the nature of the world. The only child is raised almost exclusively in the company of adults. Asterisk. Their primary social models are not peers, but parents, people who are larger, more capable, more knowledgeable, and who organize the household around the child's well-being. Asterisk. The only child learns what it feels like to be the center of a small universe. This produces a characteristic maturity and an equally characteristic difficulty. Asterisk. The only child often develops an adult vocabulary, adult interests, and adult ways of engaging with the world at an earlier age than children with siblings. They are, in many ways, mini adults from a very young age, but the world outside the family does not operate on the same principles as the world inside it. Asterisk. When the only child enters school, or the workplace, or any genuine social system, they discover that the world does not automatically organize itself around their comfort and preference. Other people have competing needs. Asterisk. Other people's opinions are not automatically subordinate to their own. This discovery can be profoundly disorienting for the only child who has not been psychologically prepared for it. Adler observed that only children often develop a particular sensitivity to perceive slights or rejections that can seem disproportionate to others. This makes complete sense in the Adlerian framework. The only child has never had the daily training in frustration tolerance that sibling competition provides. Asterisk. They have not experienced, in the most formative years, the repeated lesson that other people's needs are as real and as urgent as their own. This is not selfishness in the moral sense. Asterisk. It is a gap in psychological training that produces what looks like selfishness from the outside. Only children also frequently struggle, in Adler's observation, with what he called the loss of the spotlight. In professional contexts, in relationships, in any situation where they are not automatically recognized as exceptional, the only child may feel an anxiety that their siblings having peers do not share that, because for the only child, anonymity was never practiced. Being one among many was never the condition. The step from the center to the periphery, which everyone must take when they leave their family of origin, is a larger step for the only child than for anyone else. And yet the only child's gifts are real and significant. Their comfort with solitude, their capacity for deep and sustained focus, their seriousness and their intellectual engagement. Asterisk. Their ability to form rich relationships with adults. Adler would ask the only child, what would it feel like to be ordinary? Asterisk. Not exceptional, not the center, not the most important person in the room. Simply one human being among others, equally worthy and equally limited. Because in that ordinariness, the only child would discover something there. Psychology has always made difficult to access the relief of not having to be special in order to belong. Asterisk. Adler was not interested in birth order as a system of labels. Asterisk. He was not building a personality typology for the purpose of sorting people into categories. Asterisk. He was a clinician, and what he cared about was healing. The reason he devoted so much of his clinical attention to birth order was specific and practical, because the lifestyle conclusions formed in childhood operate without awareness. They feel like reality rather than interpretation. They feel like character rather than learned response. Asterisk. And as long as they remain unconscious, they govern. The moment you can see the logic of your own formation, the moment you can trace the line between the child you were and the adult you became, that logic loses some of its automatic power. Not all of it. These patterns are deep, but some. Asterisk. The firstborn who understands why control feels like survival can begin, in specific moments, to practice its deliberate release. Asterisk. The secondborn who sees that they are still running a race from childhood can begin to choose their direction rather than simply being propelled by old momentum. Asterisk. The middle child who recognizes the feeling of placelessness as a childhood construction can begin to inhabit their actual position rather than searching perpetually for a better one. Asterisk. The youngest who sees the pattern of waiting for rescue can begin, one small act at a time, to become the rescuer. Asterisk. The only child who recognizes the spotlight hunger can begin to find genuine pleasure in being one among equals. None of this is quick. Asterisk. None of it is simple. Asterisk. Adler spent years with patients working through exactly these patterns, meeting the same resistance that attends all genuine change. But the direction is always the same, from the unconscious to the conscious, from the determined to the chosen. Asterisk. From the child's solution to the adult's genuine response. This is what Adler called the courage to be imperfect, and it applies as much to birth order patterns as to any other form of psychological formation. The courage to see where you came from without being defined by it, to honor the child who found those solutions without being bound by them forever. Asterisk. Alfred Adler understood something that takes most of us decades to arrive at on our own, that we did not choose where we started. Asterisk. The position we were born into, the family dynamics we inherited, the solutions our child minds constructed. None of these were choices, but what we do with them, from the moment we can see them clearly, is always a choice. The firstborn can learn to put down the weight of the world. The secondborn can choose their own race. The middle child can claim their own territory. Asterisk. The youngest can become the one who gives. Asterisk. The only child can find the beauty of being one among many. Not as corrections of defects. as expansions of what was always already there. Leave the number 222 in the comments. In the Adlerian framework, 222 represents the moment of genuine recognition. The instant you see not just what you are, but where it came from, and understand that the two are not the same thing. Asterisk. The pattern and the person are not identical. Asterisk. There is always more than the pattern. If today's exploration has landed with genuine recognition, if you have seen yourself or someone you love in these pages, leave 222 here. Let this community witness where you are standing. Subscribe to Alfred Adler Philosophy, because the work of understanding where you came from so that you can choose where you go is not a single video's work. Asterisk. It is a life's work. Asterisk. And you deserve a companion for it.